Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Okie doke. We'll get started. Okie doke. So, if you guys can, I'll just mute everybody from here. Feel free to unmute if you have a question or you want to comment on anything. So, I started preparing tonight's shir yesterday, and I couldn't find some things that I was looking for. So instead, I decided to do a rerun today instead of the new shir. Hopefully next time I'll be able to do the class I wanted to do tonight, which is the topic of why we still light inside, even though it doesn't seem like we live in a makom or zman of sakana, a time of fear. So why do we light inside when the Gemara clearly says you should light outside your doorway? And in Israel, in fact, if you go most places in Israel, not all places, but most places in Israel, people light outside. So I wanted to try and talk about that topic. A lot of the shuvot are achronim that are not on Bar Ilan, so I have to figure out if there's a way to get access to some of them for a future class. But for tonight, we're going to do an oldie but a goodie, and is also Hanukkah related. This is one of the topics that I come back to, if not every year, every other year. It's just such a basic and an important topic for understanding the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles, and it also deals with kind of the title here, historical versus halachic learning, a very interesting quirk in the halacha for Ashkenazim and Sfardim regarding what's the normative way to light Hanukkah candles in our home. So the Gemara that we're going to use as our jumping off point is the Gemara Chaf Aleph Amud Beis in Shabbos, which is part of the My Hanukkah Sugyas, the whole section in Gemara and Shabbos, which deals with many of the topics of Hanukkah in Torah Sheba'al Peh. They're all right around there. And so this is a big chunk of that topic. The Gemara starts off, Tana Rabban and the rabbis teach, mitzvahs Hanukkah ner ish ubeso. The basic mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles is only to light one candle per household per night, right? A total of 8 candles over the course of the 8 nights of Hanukkah, and you fulfill your basic obligation of lighting Hanukkah candles in your home. I don't know anybody who does the ner ish ubeso unless they are in dire circumstances, and we can talk a little bit about why that is. But certainly it seems that, right, though this is the basic mitzvah, very few people actually do this and common practice. The second level, the hamehadrin, right, the higher level fulfillment of mitzvah of Hanukkah is ner l'chol echad ve'echad, is a candle for every person in the household. Meaning, if there are 5 people in your household, you light 5 candles on night 1, you light 5 candles on night 2, you light 5 candles on night 7, you light 5 candles on night 8, you light 5 candles all the way through. Okay? And again, interesting, but not normally done. Where most of our work is going to be is in understanding the final shita, the final perspective, which is going to have multiple parts and layers, which is umahadrin mina mahadrin, the best of the best, the ideal way to light your Hanukkah candles. Beit Shammai omrim yom rishon dolik shmona mikan ve'elach pochetz v'holech. So Beit Shammai's version of the mahadrin mina mahadrin is you start with 8 candles, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Beis Hillel omrim, Beis Hillel says yom rishon malik echas. You light 1 on the first day, mikan ve'elach mosi v'holech, and moving forward you add each night. Now, I never dawned on me, but when you think about it, when you think about other holidays, Beit Shammai is really a lot more in touch with some of our other holidays. When you think about Pesach, for instance, Pesach is very front-loaded, right? The first night is when you have Seder night, right? It's the main time that you're required to eat matzah. The rest of the times you can eat matzah, right? There's a famous Vilna Gaon that says that there's a mitzvah to eat it the rest of Pesach, but some people think that the only time to really mitzvah eat matzah is that first night. And so much of the action happens in that very beginning of Pesach. Then you have Sukkot also, right? The first night is the time where you're obligated to own a lulav and esrog or to shake a lulav and esrog that belongs to you. The rest of the time, not as important. How important it is for us to have that first meal or first two meals in the sukkah. The mitzvos are pumped up at the very beginning of the holidays. So again, you could imagine lighting 8 Hanukkah candles makes a lot of sense. You start off the holiday with this incredible right bang, but it's not like that. And one of the things I want to maybe address in passing in the today's share is why that might be. What's the difference between Hanukkah versus the other holidays? But anyways, moving on in the Gemara itself. So the Gemara says again, Beit Shammai says 8765432 Beit Hillel says 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. Upligi ba Amorai b'Marava, and the rabbis, the Amoraim in Israel, Rav Yossi bar Avin, Rav Yossi bar Zvida, these two Rav Yossis, debated what's the reasoning behind Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Chad Amar time of the Beit Shammai keneged Yamin hanechnasim, but time of the Beit Hillel keneged Yamin hayotzin. Right, that the perspective is whether you are looking at all the days that are coming into Hanukkah. So on the first night, there are still 8 days left of Hanukkah. So Beit Shammai says you should light eight candles, and then there's only 7 days left, so 7, then only 6 days left, etc. Beit Hillel says it's how many days have passed. Right, the first night is the first night of Hanukkah is now passing. The second night is now the second night of Hanukkah is now passing. So you're counting upwards versus downwards. And the second one explained the machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Chad Amar Taima de Beit Shammai keneged Parei Hachag. So the model of, again, Sukkot, not quite the model that I mentioned, but the fact that we bring 70 bulls on Sukkot, but for those who follow along, you start with 13 bulls on the first day, then go down to 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and then you're done with the bulls. So the bulls, then you bring one, obviously, on Shmini Atzeres, but the 70 bulls go down in terms of their number. They start off with the largest number, and then they kind of go down over the course of time. And Beit Hillel says, no, it's a spiritual rule. Is ma'alim b'kodesh ve'ein moridin. We elevate in holiness. We don't go down, right? So the point is, right, you maybe right, even right, you start a shul in a little place, and then you find a storefront, and then maybe right, you build a building, and then maybe there's an expansion, right? It's a slow process. Ma'alim b'kodesh ve'ein moridin. In the normal world and in the spiritual world, you have to build in levels. You can't just jump to being right a perfect human being. You have to work on yourself little by little by little things, a bunch of little things, one step at a time. So anyone have any thoughts? What's the difference between Hanukkah and the other holidays? That with Hanukkah we paskin like Beit Hillel, that we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We kind of start anticlimactically. We normally set up all the right. We have all the signage and all the pomp and circumstance. Then we light one candle. It's a little bit of a letdown, right? I mean, that first night of Hanukkah is normally so exciting, but then we only light one candle. So I heard an answer from Rabbi Yaakov Glasser, which again is Shana Begelman's brother, and he was a mentor of mine, and he's the head of the CGF. He's a rabbi in Passaic, New Jersey. But I was curious, before I give the answer, does anyone have any thoughts why Hanukkah goes up and all the other holidays start with a bang and then kind of fizzle out?
Could it have to do with the numbers of people who are in Yerushalayim at the start of Pesach and Sukkot, and who then dwindle as the week progresses?
So 100%, but I would say that just adds to the question. Meaning the reason that there are all those people there is because all the action is on the first night, right? Meaning if, let's say, the Korban Pesach was not the very beginning of Pesach or even right before Pesach going into that first night, but was set up to happen on the climax, the end days of Pesach, then people would come for the end days of Pesach, right? Meaning, I think your point is well taken, but I feel like it's a little bit a chicken and egg issue.
Well, to flip that around for Hanukkah, there is a growing sense of, wouldn't say excitement, but maybe of the beauty of the Chag as you build up to the point where your entire Chanukia is glowing, whereas on the first night, it's just a single candle, it's not a whole lot to get excited about visually, but
Right.
there's the sense that it's getting better and better and better, which is different perhaps in its way from the other Chagim.
Right, exactly. So I mean, my question, I guess, is maybe I wasn't clear, but it's trying to figure out why. Like, why do we set up Hanukkah that way, as opposed to setting up like Beit Shammai, where we have all 8 candles on the first night and then slowly dwindle our way down?
Well,
Fred, did you? Yeah.
yeah. Well, I'm just thinking the first thing that comes to my mind is that we have a biblical holidays and post-biblical, with Hanukkah,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's maybe that presents a different perspective.
So I think you're on the right track. I think in many ways, if you think about the biblical holidays all represent a miracle that was initiated by God, and then human beings react to it. Right. So whether it's the Exodus, whether it's the fact that God provided us the clouds of glory, whether it's Mamad Har Sinai, all the biblical holidays are these miraculous events that we then have to react to. When you think about Hanukkah, what we really are celebrating with Hanukkah is the miracle of the oil. But the miracle of the oil was a human-generated miracle. Not that we caused the oil to last. That was God causing the oil to last. But we made a choice, the Maccabim made a choice to use only the purest of oils. They didn't have to, right? There's a concept of Tumah Hutra B'Tzibur, that when you have the majority of the Jewish people are not pure, you can use not pure oil on behalf of that congregation. But when the Maccabim decided to go in and purify the sanctuary, they refused to use any impure oil. They wanted only the best oil. And when they initiated that, God made a miracle to allow that oil to last until they were able to produce new tahor, new pure oil. So again, it's a human created miracle versus a godly miracle. Now, when it comes to a godly miracle, God can just provide everything in one moment. That's what God is. But when it comes to human beings, the way that we work is that we sequentially build, right? That's kind of the beauty of science and so many other areas of human development, that we build off of the great findings and achievements of previous people and generations to be able to keep on expanding out the universe of technologies. And so that's why Hanukkah, which is a human-started celebration, perhaps, right, is set up this way. Regardless, there's a side point, but the for our purposes now, moving forward, I want to just highlight 2 things. Number one, we have 3 levels of Hanukkah observance when we light the menorah. Level 1, Ner Ishu Beso, 1 candle per household for each night of Hanukkah. Night 7 of Hanukkah, just 1 candle, and you fulfill your basic obligation. Second level, Mahadrin. If there are 5 people in your household, you light 5 on night 1, you light 5 on night 2, 5 on night 7, 5 on night 8, you light 5 the whole way through. The third perspective is that you light 1 candle per night. So you add a new candle each night. So on night 1, it's 1, on night 3, it's 3, on night 4, it's 4, on night 7, it's 7. What's unclear, and this is what some of the Rishonim debate, is and even within that, we have Beit Shammai goes 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we have Beit Hillel, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, what's unclear is whether or not the last Mahadrin, the Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin, is building off the first, meaning does it go A, and then there's B and C? This is Mahadrin, this is Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin, and there's like a line from here and a line from here, both coming from the Ner Ishu Beso? Or is it a 3-level sequential? You have Ner Ishu Beso, 1 candle per person, 1 candle per household, then 1 candle per person in the household, and then 1 candle per night. But likely, if it's building in this direction, it's going to be 1 candle per person per night, as opposed to 1 candle per night. In other words, if we say 1 candle per night in a ascending order means on night 3 you light 3 candles, what happens if you have 3 people in the house? Does that mean every person's lighting 3 candles, or that there's 1 menorah that's lighting 3 candles. So that's going to be a major debate that we'll see in terms of how you understand this Gemara. And the debate stems from Tosfos and the Rambam. So the Bali Tosfos, again, the Bali Tosfos are an amalgamation of medieval commentators in Germany and France, mainly, overwhelmingly is from Germany and France. And these rabbis are students, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, grand-students, right, a couple generations down from Rashi. So it's a lot of Rashi's students, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, right? So Rabbeinu Tam, the Ri of Dampierre, that's Rashi's grandson and great-grandson. These are some of the major Tosafists that we have. So the Tosfot, again, you can find it on the outside of every page of Gemara. And the Bali Tosfos say the following: Mahadrim min Mahadrim, the best of the best, which commenting on the third category, Nira Lari. So it appeared to Rav Yitzchak of Dampierre, again, Rashi's great-grandson. When they're arguing, right, when they're talking about 1 candle per night, right, that each night you add another candle, they're going back on the original perspective. So the first perspective was you only light 1 candle in each per household. Now we say, no, it's still one menorah per household, but it goes ascending order. So on night 7, 7 candles. On night 6, 6 candles. Night 4, 4 candles. Simple as that. Shekain yesh yoter hidur, and why is this better than any other version? Why is it better to light 1 candle per night? Because there is a clear as day reality. When someone looks at your menorah, they realize that you are lighting in ascending order. And it's not about how many people are in the household. It's not about that. It's about the ascending level of miracle, that the miracle kept on getting greater and greater with each passing day. And again, the buildup of human development in spirituality and everything else, that notion, it builds up each and every day. And when you have 1 menorah, it really highlights what night of Hanukkah it is. When you walk by a window with only 1 menorah, very easy to tell what night we're up to. Oh, mechaser shehu keneged yamim hanichnasim. All right, or if you're passing like Beit Shammai, so again, what if you're counting down? Same idea. But if every single person in the household has a candle or has multiple candles, afil Yosef mikan ve'elach, even if everyone adds per day, leika hekera, it's hard to tell what night of Hanukkah you're up to. Maybe they'll just think that this is a clown house, that there's like 500,000 people inside the house. So they have all these candles because there's so many people inside the house, and they just lit a candle per person in the household. And even if they think, oh, everyone's lighting per night, it's hard to tell when you look at a window with all these different lights exactly what night it is, because you have to kind of figure out based off of the Chanukiahs. That's the view of Tosfos. The Rambam, I think, is the more intuitive reading of the Gemara, that you have the basic level, Ner Yishubeso, candle per person, candle per household. Number 2, Mahadrin, candle per person in the household. Number 3, candle per person per night in the household. So on night 3 in a house of 3, you're going to light a total of 9 candles. There'll be 3 Chanukiyot. There'll be 3 menorahs that you're going to be having your lights on. Says the Rambam, we'll read inside. How many candles you light on Hanukkah? Mitzvah kol bayis v'bayis madlik ner echad. Right, the basic mitzvah is every single house has 1 candle. Ben shiyu hanashim b'bayis habayis merubin. Ben shelo hayu elo adam echad. Whether there's a lot of people or 1 person, you light only 1 candle is the basic mitzvah. V'mahader is a mitzvah. Someone who wants to make the mitzvah more beautiful. Madlik neros kiminyan anshe habayis. You should light the number of candles per people in the house. Ner l'chol echad v'echad, 1 candle per person. Ben nashim, whether men or women. V'mahader yoter. Someone who wants to do even better. Al zev osa mitzvah min amuvchar madlik ner lekol echad ve'echad balayla harishon umosif v'holich b'chol layla balayla ner echad. Every person in the household lights 1 candle on the first night, and each person adds another candle to their menorah, to their Chanukiah, on each successive night. Right? Ketzad harei hayu anashim habayit asara. So if you have 10 people in the house, balil rishon madlik asara, the first night you light 10 candles, balil sheni esrim, second night 20, third night 30, etc., etc. Okay, so again, according to the Rambam, it's all about adding more light, right? The more the more candles that you have, you're bringing more light into the world. And again, the light, the candle, the fire is all representative of spirituality, which many have pointed out that Hanukkah is a holiday that doesn't really focus on the physical destruction of the Jews, but more about the spiritual destruction, that the Jews were often fighting not really the Greeks. They were fighting the Greeks, but they were mostly fighting the Hellenists, the people who had basically wanted to be secularists and didn't want to necessarily have religious Jews. They could be culturally Jewish, but you're no longer being religious Jews. And so in many ways, the battle over Hanukkah was a spiritual battle. And so the hosafas, or the adding of light, is again a metaphor, an idea for this notion of bringing more spirituality into the world. So that's kind of debate between Tosfos and the Rambam, focusing on knowing what night of the miracle we're up to and how the miracle is a building process of every single night you add, right? Mostly for Holech, another candle to your one menorah. That's Tosfos. Or the Rambam, it's about Hosafas, or you're adding light to the world. You're metaphorically trying to, right, extinguish any darkness by spreading the light of Torah and our ideas. Now, just a couple of little insights. So first of all, the Ritva, one of the grand students of the Ramban, so the Ritva highlights that there's an irony in the view of Tosfos. The view of Tosfos, again, is that the three levels is one candle per household, one candle per person in the household, and then one candle per night is the ideal way. So the Ritva points out that, right, Yish Shapirshu Shmona Lakol Echad Ve'echad, the Ish Shmona Lakol B'nei Habayis Zimnin de Bitzri Neros Min Mahadrin Shemadlik Ner Lakol Echad Ve'echad Uvesheni Shnayim Lakol Echad. Right. So his point is that if you're only lighting one menorah, one Chanukiah, then the irony is that you end up lighting less candles if you are in a household with, let's say, 5 people, right? Over the course of Hanukkah, if you have a household of 5 people, so 5 times 8 is 40 candles. So is that a good example? Might not be a good example. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think it's going to be a bad example. 15, 21, 26, 30. 33, 35, 36. Oh, no, it works. Okay. So, yeah. So if you have 5 or more people in your household over the course of Hanukkah, you'll be lighting more candles than if you do the 5 candles per night than if you light 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And certainly if you have more than 5 people, it certainly is that way. And so the point is that there's this irony that you end up having less light, less candles, but it's considered better. So that's the Ritva's point. A little slight ding against the Bali Tosfos. The Tosfos are not phased, though. Again, for them, the clarity of what night of the miracle you're up to seems to be the main key. Now, this is where the title comes from, the difference between historical learning versus halachic learning. When it comes to history, so it's important to realize that the Bali Tosfos, as I mentioned, are French and German. And the Rambam, I didn't talk about his biography, but the Rambam starts off in southern Spain. And when the Christians are pushing down the Reconquista and the Almohades are pushing north from North Africa, the Muslims, they're battling with each other. Who's going to have control over Spain? The Rambam and his family flee south with his father, Maimon Adayan. They go to Fez, Morocco, before they travel east to Egypt, and Maimon Adayan probably makes it all the way to Israel. But regardless, the Rambam is considered one of the preeminent Sephardi poskim. So if you were to follow the halacha, you would think that the Sephardi poskim would follow the Rambam, and the Ashkenazi poskim would follow the Tosfists. But we find a really interesting quirk in the Shulchan Aruch, and this doesn't happen so often. It's why I'm very fond of this shir, because it teaches us a couple of interesting historical points as well, which I'll get to briefly. But if you look at the Shulchan Aruch, it's reversed. Kama Neros Mad, like the Shulchan Aruch says, Rav Yosef Cairo, again, the preeminent Sephardi posek in the 15th century, 15th and 16th century. Kama Neros Madlik, how many candles do you light? Balayla Rishon Madlik Echad. On the first night, you light 1 candle. Every night thereafter, you light 1 extra candle. Ha'achron yiyu shmona, and if you weren't following in the last night of Hanukkah, there will be 8 candles. Ba'afilu im rabim b'nei habayis, even if there's lots of people in the household. Lo yadliku yoter, you don't light more. Whose view is that? That's the Bali Tosos. That's the Tosafos. That's the Ashkenazi Rishonim's perspective being brought down as the halacha according to the Sephardi Posik. That's a little bit funny. And then what happens is even funnier. The Rama, Ramosha Israelis, who again is living in Krakow, in Poland, who's again the preeminent Ashkenazi, one of the preeminent Ashkenazi poskim of his day, again a little bit younger. The Rama is one of many of the halachas of this age that don't live very long lives. But the Rama says, Haga, Yesh Omrim, the Kol Achim B'nei Abayis Yadlik, every person in the household lights, according to the Rambam. And this is the basic practice for people today, at least in Ashkenazi circles. But then the Rama makes it interesting. The Rama adds this interesting line over here. And some use this line to explain perhaps at least what the Rama is doing. Everyone should put their menorah in a particularly special place. So that people walking by know how many candles you lit that night. That's from the Maral Prague. So does anybody want to take a stab at what perhaps Rama is doing with that? Why is he putting his menorah for far away from, or in a special place, each menorah? So I think it's to fulfill the viewpoint of Tosfot. Even though he's saying everybody lights a menorah, if each menorah is distinct and easy to pick out when looking out through the window, and you realize, oh wow, that's a menorah, that's a menorah, that's a menorah, then each menorah will be very easy to pick out what night you're up to. And so perhaps what the Rama is trying to do is have his cake and eat it too. He's trying to paskin some sort of combination of doing both what the Rambam suggests as well as the Bali Tosos. But still, it's fascinating that the Shulchan Aruch at his core paskins like Tosos, and the Rama seems to paskin like the Rambam, and then just adds an extra layer to say, but don't forget about the perspective of the Bali Tosos as well. Now, just to highlight how it's not sui generis, but it's very rare. This is not something you find very often. Sui generis is one of a kind, right? So it's not sui generis. We find this crossover, cross section of Rishonim and Poskim. But just to highlight this, the Taz, he goes through the Gemara, and then he comes to his conclusion, and he says, "Uvakan yesh chidush b'minhag shesfardim noagim kitosos kamashikasav beis Yosef Ashkenazim karambam bezolo matzinu b'shar makomos." This is not something that we find in other places, right? So after summarizing our entire sugya, the Taz basically highlights that this is very strange. It's strange that the Shulchan Aruch is pasking like Tosfos, and that the Rambam is the basis for the Rama's addition. Now, what I will say is that many poskim and historians in particular point out that normally we think of the Ashkenazi and Sephardi practices as developing in a vacuum almost, right? That each one kind of developed in their own way, and there wasn't so much interplay or interaction. And the reality is that we know from different stories of the Rishonim that that's not 100% true, right? That there's a great example that after the Marami Rutenberg is thrown in jail, his student, the Rush, flees because he's fearful that if he stays in Germany, that the people are going to basically kidnap him and ransom him to the Jewish community like they had done to his teacher, to the Maram. And so he flees south to Spain. And when he arrives in Spain, the Rashba, right? So the student of the Ramban, the Rashba, Shlomo ben Aderet, he helps the Rush find a shul to become the rabbi, despite being, again, the Rush is a big Ashkenazi rabbi going into Spain, which is Sephardi world, but he finds a shul and he becomes the rabbi of the shul, despite being an Ashkenazi Rishon. So you have these interactions between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. In addition, you have the southern France, you have what's called Provence, which is this kind of a lost tradition. Most of us are either Ashkenaz or Sfarad, But there was another group of people in southern France that were known as Provençal. They had their own traditions. And in Provence, they were often the go-betweens. They would often share things with each group because southern France is in between Spain and France and Germany. So it's kind of the buffer between Ashkenaz and Sfarad. So you had kind of people like Rav Avram Hayarchi, who would collect minhagim of Ashkenazim, Sfaradim, and Provençal Jews and record them all in a book together so that people can kind of compare and contrast different practices at that time. So you have the point of all this is just that sometimes we think that these people didn't have any interactions because they didn't have airplanes, they didn't have an easy way of transporting, but there still was actually a decent amount of crossover and cross-germination between the Jews of France and Germany and the Jews of Spain. And this sugya is just a great example of that reality when you have this weird quirk where Ashkenazi Rishonim are the basis for Sephardi poskim and vice versa. The Aruch HaShulchan also comments on this, but I think that we're good right here. I'm going to stop here for any thoughts or questions, but let me just summarize before I do so. So tonight we looked at one of the most basic and fundamental Gemaras regarding Hanukkah. And that is, how do we understand the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles on Hanukkah? And so the Gemara talks about these three different levels, And then on the third level, which is the Mahadrim and Mahadrin, that you do one candle per night, we noted a debate first between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, whether you go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or down 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We had a little bit of time to discuss why perhaps Hanukkah follows Beit Hillel, which is Malam B'Kodesh, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, when so many of the other holidays are set up with this crescendo at the beginning, and then it kind of fizzles out as it goes. And so we made the suggestion that Hanukkah is man's holiday, that God reacted with a miracle, versus the other holidays where God had a miracle and man says thanks. And so the holidays are just structured very differently because of how the holidays came to be. We then shifted our conversation to defining Mahadrim and Mahadrin, this third perspective, that the best of the best way of lighting our menorah. Is it just to light one menorah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or is it one candle per person per night? So that the idea is that you just have a tremendous amount of light that you're adding. That was a debate between Tosfos and the Rambam. Then we saw when we traced this machlokas that in fact, when it comes to the Psak Halacha, there's this crossover between the Ashkenazi Psak with the Sephardi poskim and the Sephardi Rishonim, Sephardi medieval commentators with the Ashkenazi poskim, with the Ashkenazi halachic advisors. So you have this really interesting historical reality that's kind of at play here, while at the same time, a very interesting overall sugya about the candles of Hanukkah. I hope this was informative and helpful, and I'll pause here for any thoughts or questions.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry,
effort.
the book that was put together in Provence that was doing the compare and contrast, is that generally available? I mean, is there translations of that?
I don't know if there's an English translation. It's called Sefer HaManhig, which is the book of basically Minhagim, and it's written by Rav Avraham Hayarchi, Rav Avraham of Lunel. Lunel, like lunar, is like moon, and Yareach or Yarchi is moon, so that's kind of his name. It's helpful to remember it, but he's an interesting source. You can find it on Hebrew books, but I don't know of any English translation at this point.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, well, hopefully next week we'll talk about why we light our menorahs inside the house when the Gemara very clearly says that you should light it outside. And if you go to Israel, I'm sure many of you have seen, or either in person or from pictures, that everybody lights more or less outside in Israel. And so trying to figure out how these things work and why they work this way, we'll discuss that hopefully next week.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yashkot.
Good night. Thank you.
Night.
Have a good night, everybody.
Night.